From the studios of the Optimism Institute, welcome to Blue Sky, where we share stories and insights to remind us that there is always blue sky above. Sometimes you just have to get your head above the clouds to see it. I'm your host, Bill Burke. On this special Blue Sky episode, I'll be speaking with a mother-daughter team who together co-founded the Goodness Exchange. They are Dr. Lynda Ulrich and her daughter, Liesl Ulrich-Verderber. And as you'll soon hear, they are a pleasure to speak with, and perhaps that's because they share many of the worldviews that we promote here at the Optimism Institute. Dr. Lynda Ulrich spent the bulk of her career in dentistry and came to her current work after observing so many of her patients developing a very dour and negative view of the state of the world. In addition to founding the Goodness Exchange and hosting their Conspiracy of Goodness podcast, on which yours truly was honored to be a guest, she is also the author of the book Happiness is an Option: Thriving Instead of Surviving in the Era of the Internet. Lynda's daughter, Liesl Ulrich-Verderber, graduated from Harvard University with an interest in psychology and neuroscience. She's an example of someone who is not a lifelong optimist, but who came to this mindset later in life and now works to spread positive social change with an emphasis today on education. I hope you enjoy this Blue Sky conversation with Lynda Ulrich and her daughter Liesl as much as I did. Lynda Ulrich and Liesl Ulrich-Verderber, welcome to the Blue Sky podcast.
Hello, my friend Bill.
This is not the first time I've had two guests on at a time. I have had a married couple. I've had business colleagues. You are my first parent-child. So I will resist the urge to have ask Liesl about her mother or play therapist or any of that. But we may get into the dynamics of mother-daughter collaboration and work. But thank you so much for being on. I've been really inspired by the work you do, and I'm really excited to move on with this conversation. You both have come to this position that optimism and hopefulness is an important thing. You've taken different paths, different stages of your life. And Lynda, I'd start with you. You have a childhood that was marked by some very extreme tragedy, but somehow at an early age, instead of taking that tragedy and looking for all that is bad in the world, you somehow figured out a way to look for what's good in the world. Can you talk about maybe where that came from and how that's helped you?
Mm-hmm. So I did have a terrible childhood tragedy when I was about 15. And, that's that age where things can turn on a dime. And I think I came from an environment where my parents had National Geographics on every horizontal surface of our house. They believed that the universe was friendly. They weren't religious, but they just believed in other people, and they just taught us about wonder and nature. And my dad was a doctor, and so he knew the hardcore parts of life, and my mom a nurse. And I think it was something about the foundation that I had growing up in this little small town that helped me to choose the light and not the darkness. Because you're absolutely right. When these things happen to us, we can ruminate about all that's bad with the world. And I just was determined from a very young age to prove that the story about the world was the opposite, and that that event was such an outlier.
And Liesl, it's been described to me, first by your mother, that you were not always necessarily an optimist. And I get asked all the time, are optimists born or made and all that stuff. So can you give us a sense of what your path has been to not only a life of optimism, but actually kind of working in the field and trying to spread the word?
Yeah. So I went, I kind of, grew up in a household imbued with everything that Lynda or Mom, I'm never sure which to say here, just said. But, I went to Harvard and I came out kind of the classic jaded Harvard student of I'm going to get the money and I'm going to do this. And, very classic, it's hard not to do that in that environment. And so I came out in this sort of smug way. I'm sure I was just a delight to have at Thanksgiving dinner. And whenever I called once a year, and, thought I really knew everything about the world, like a classic 22-year-old. And when I graduated and mom needed some help with, then we called it Ever Widening Circles. Now it's the Goodness Exchange. And so I came in and I started working on sort of the business side of it, and then fell in love with the way in which the content that we are writing about the positivity in the world, like, changed my worldview. And so I think over time, it's really changed my perspective on the world. So I don't think you have to come in a natural optimist to any of this. I think it's being exposed to things that changes the way you look at the world.
I that puts it beautifully, because I'm experiencing much of the same. And when you pursued this work, let's go back to your classmates, your Harvard classmates. I imagine there are many, because I face this, and I'm way more advanced in years than you are, who kind of roll their eyes and think what you're doing is pie in the sky and come on, get real. The world's going to end because of climate change, and this, we've never been more divided. And here you are. How do you feel about that? How do you answer that? Do you ignore it? Do you try to evangelize with them? How do you approach that?
Like, we're all going to have to live in the world in the future. And so I would much rather, make people aware of all the goodness in the world and then raise a next generation of people that see that problems can be solved, than to just sort of arm everybody with pessimism, right? Like, nothing is going to get done to make the world better unless we believe a better future is possible. And that can seem sort of pie in the sky or rose-colored glasses to some people. But those people don't seem to want to make a positive change. And I think we need to catch the people who are on the edge, like myself, who maybe don't come in with such a positive attitude. And help us all understand the ways in which we can small and incrementally work towards a more positive future. Like I said, I don't want to live in a world where nobody believes the future is going to be better, because no one's going to work on the problems. So we may as well evangelize to some extent for what's possible, so that people know what to reach for, especially young people know what to reach for.
Great answer. And Lynda, there will be other parents listening to this who have young children who are wallowing in doom online and on social media. And I'm wondering how you approach this with Liesl, because, as a parent, sometimes it's the worst thing you can do is tell them how to behave or how to think or whatever, and just maybe hope it changes. Or how did you approach, you had sounds like a fairly actively different worldview about these things than your daughter did. How did you approach that as a mom?
Well, the first thing is, I don't think any of us naturally know how to, we don't have any natural coping skills. I think we're all born with a toolbox full of some random set of tools to handle life's adversities. And whether our life experiences match the tools we have is completely random. But back to my tragedy, I went on this great search. I read both the Old and New Testament. I began reading every philosopher I could come across. And I was raised in the 70s, so I got the benefit of some older, 30 somethings who gave me all those great books from the 60s. And I just started really, really searching the various perspectives. And the thing I learned overall, and I taught my children from a very, very young age, is that you have a choice. That when it's all said and done, it's that the last thing someone can take is your choice of perspective. And so, Liesl, what did I always used to say to you when you were in a terrible, terrible mode?
Oh, change your state.
Just change your state. I mean, I said that to my kids when they were 4. Like, we can be miserable right now. I'm hot. I'm hungry too, blah, blah, or we can change our state. And I think if you're, repetition is truth. If you stay consistent with little children and you model the behavior you're trying to talk to them about. We traveled all over the world with these kids. We drugged them to some unbelievably rough places. Really rough. They used to ask me when we go on a global travel, they would say, "Mom, is this going to be an eating trip or a not eating trip?"
That's great. Well, and I imagine traveling the world too. I think that travel is incredibly broadening, incredibly, I think it fuels optimism. I think when you get around the world and realize we're all in the same boat, we're all in this. You introduced me to Nicole Stott, the astronaut, who says, we're all in this spaceship Earth together. And I think the more you travel, the better. Liesl, as you reflect back on your childhood, would you say that exposure to the world has contributed to current your current state?
Yeah, I think so. I think just seeing how people around the world live, right? And the ways in which it's vastly different, and the ways in which, the kids are still going to school, whether they're on a school bus or on a donkey or walking there, right? Like, I think, like, for me, traveling the world and having to, I think, experience the discomfort of sometimes in other cultures, as a little kid, right? Having to experience the joys and the cultural differences. It's all part of this kind of grand, tapestry that we are all kind of now becoming more and more interwoven with. And so I think for me, it gave me this broader perspective on other people's lives. And again, those similarities and differences. And then also, I mean, like, you're a bored little kid, so you're going to go play with the Italian girl that you can't speak the language of, and somehow, you're out adventuring in the forest for a day, which sounds idyllic, but like, it kind of forces you to go outside of your comfort zone, and then you get more comfortable when you are in a space of it, of comfort, right? It expands those horizons a little bit.
Lynda Ulrich says she was raised by parents who thought the world was good, and their service orientation made a lasting impact on their daughter. Liesl came to her optimism a little later in life after she was, as she describes, a typical jaded young college grad. Lynda gave Liesl and her siblings valuable advice when she told them that people can't take away your perspective, and when you get too down, you can always change your state. And I appreciated what was said here about travel. And while not everyone has the opportunity to see other parts of the world, when you're able to, it really can broaden your outlook and fuel your optimism. Now, back to our conversation. Lynda, you were, the bulk of your career, you were a dentist. And I say that in a way that you don't always think of a dentist then branching out into the kind of work you're doing today. What led you to that transition? And I didn't realize there was a name before Goodness Exchange to start what you started. Why'd you do it? What was your vision, and how has it turned out compared to where you thought it would be?
Well, my husband and I, because of my dad and mom being, in the service of others, they were old school doctor and nurse, old school. My dad gave everybody in our little town of 15,000 our home phone number. It rang all the way through every dinner, all the way through every night, and he never complained once in 40 years. So we saw that, and we did my husband's also a dentist, and we did the practice of dentistry like that. We were relationship based. We too gave every single person our home phone number for 37 years. And because we knew people, because we took the time to talk deeply about the things they cared about and what was going on, man, oh man, from 2010 to 2014, people's attitude about the future and how fearful they were, there was something going on. And it was conversation after conversation. We were seeing people who were otherwise chipper and cheerful. All of a sudden, they had such fear of the future. And I kept saying, geez, somebody got to do something about this. And gosh, somebody's got to do something about this. And then one day, a series of events caused me to just go home and say, guess it's going to be me. I was a lifelong writer, and I'm always embraced technology way ahead of the curve. So I could create a website, write, and I started to write one article a day on anything under the sun to prove it's still an amazing world, and publish in 2014.
Wow, so you've been at it quite some time now, and the years you just mentioned dovetail well with the years that Jonathan Haidt often cites in his work about teaching college students, and then all of a sudden these attitudes started to change. You also said you like technology. Do you think there was something going on with smartphones? And this is a question for both of you because you lived through it as well, Liesl. Do you think there was something going on with smartphones and social media that may have contributed to that, or what do you think the root causes might have been for those changes that you saw?
I'll just say that, for me, it was definitely in the office when I'd say, "So," blah, 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 and we'd go back to where we always took notes of what we talked about last time, so I could always pick up the conversation even 6 months later. It was always about the negative noise in the news and social media and the acrimony on social media, like, people were just getting all caught up in it, and they didn't see the forest as the trees, and they got this digital life, Bill. Remember when we used to have our working life and our personal life? And now we have this digital life that is some weird thing that hangs over all of them. Lisa, what do you think?
I think of it a little bit like, the people that were put in charge of social media at the time, right? You think about Facebook, you think about all these big companies. They're super young people. There's no rules. I remember growing up, right? And I never had a MySpace, but like the kids in 8th grade were making up the rules, right? And so if you have a space where like children are making up the rules, essentially, right? There's very few prefrontal cortexes that were that were completely developed in making the internet and social media at the time in its early years. I think you're going to get a lot of the disinformation that now we're seeing come to the fore. We're getting, so many different things there about how people interact with it. And I think to some extent, right? Like I think there is a misunderstanding of how the internet works, of how social media works, right? It's complex. And the vast majority of people don't know. If you're in the media, you know kind of like how it works, but your average person doesn't. And I think that can lead to a big spreading of disinformation. That can lead to a big spreading of, people creating beliefs and conspiracies, right? And I can say that as we improve on our digital literacy, as we improve on our internet literacy, I think we're seeing a switch now in younger generations. I look at my brother, who's like 6 years younger than me. He's not interested in being on Instagram anymore. He's not interested on being on Facebook anymore. And I think there's more and more young people who grew up as mostly digital natives. I still had to manually rewind my VCRs. My brother never had to. Like I think that there are more and more young people who are now growing up and they're saying, this is negatively impacting me. I don't want to be a part of this. And so I think to an extent, maybe we're coming out of a generation that's now more digitally literate. They played in the sandbox where the rules were made by young kids and they said, I don't like it here very much. And now they're moving on.
Really interesting. And I think you're right about that. The rules are being made up as we go. And today we see this with AI too, where the rules are being made up by the people making the products, which can be good, but can also be really dangerous. And they just went for it. And before we knew it, we had these things upon us. I think, Lynda, you said something really important too, is the separation between our lives, or different parts of our life. I think regardless of whether the content on social media or on your phone is worth consuming, we're consuming so much of it. So it used to be in my lifetime, and sometimes I say my parents, no, me, when I was younger, I would read a couple of newspapers in the morning. I would go to work and then I'd come home. I didn't find out at 10:15 that the politician I didn't like said something crazy, or that I didn't need to know, and I didn't know. And now I think we feel like we need to know, we're going to be missing out, we need to be informed, and we're over-informed with bad information. And I think it's really unhealthy. Does that ring true to you, Lynda, as someone who probably lived through more of this?
Yeah, I think that people don't appreciate the fact that they're a tool. They're being used on the internet. I give the talk about the four
I
things
love
that
the
we can
four
do.
simple shifts. I love
Yeah,
them.
the 4 shifts. Like all you have to do if you are looking at something at lunch and you're going like this, click, on this, click, you are voting for those things that caught your attention, even if they scared the heck out of you. You just gave them a vote. And people don't understand that they are the authors of their own demise when they complain about the internet. They chose it. The algorithms are following what they clicked on.
Exactly. No, and I think that pause too is, I like to challenge people. Why do you use social media? And a lot of people will say, oh, it connects me with other people or it helps me stay informed. Then it's like, okay, the way you just spent the last hour, were you connecting better with people? Were you becoming well informed by a lot of that garbage you were consuming? Probably not. But once you've started, you go down that rabbit hole, and it's tough. Liesl, do you see? I mean, yeah, I assume you have friends who are just spending this. You read these statistics 5, 6 hours a day on some screen or other. Is that something you're experiencing? And I imagine it's a challenge for you. It's a challenge for me. I mean, how do you see this and fight it?
Yeah, so I think for me, I have such a strange and like nuanced, view of this, and I also think that I have surrounded myself with a lot of people who are not on social media. I recently had a friend from college pass away, and none of those I didn't know what was happening with any of my roommates because they weren't on social media. So it was sort of strange. I thought it was interesting. Like I was the one that was most on social media, and I think I'm not that on social media. So again, I think there is this turn away to some extent in this like mid 20s, early 30s range where we're recognizing that like, the people in front of us are more important. Like maybe I'm still on my screen texting my good friend and we're keeping up, but I am seeing more and more people use social media for like inspiration. As a creative person, I'll follow, artists that inspire me, or if I want to learn a new skill, I'll use social media for that. I think that there is something to be said for the benefits of social media when it comes to how it connects us to potentially communities that can improve our skills or help our curiosities in a positive way. But I know that that also has a negative side, and it also leads to a lot of isolation and this sort of feeling that I'm connected to people, but I'm really not getting that true feeling of human connection. And I think a lot of people are reeling from that in particular.
In today's world, it's hard to imagine doctors and dentists giving out their home numbers. But this is how Lynda's family chose to serve. This also helped them get to know their patients as people. And it was interesting to hear Lynda started to notice her patients turning negative around 2010 and in the years following. An observation made by others suggesting that the rise in smartphones and social media may have had an influence on our collective worldview. These many years later, it's refreshing to hear a young person like Liesl saying that the people in front of us are more important than those with whom we interact online. Amen to that. And now, back to my blue sky conversation with Liesl and Lynda. I was interested to hear what you said about your brother, Liesl, going back to Jonathan Haidt. I don't know, you both are in Vermont. I don't know if the Vermont schools are starting to remove cell phones from school or
Our
placing
local
rules.
high school did, yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
so I'd be curious to know what you've heard, but the anecdotal and sometimes more than anecdotal information that I'm hearing is that after the initial shock and awe of all of this for the young people, they actually kind of like it. And we're hearing things like there was one school district that talked about in the first couple months of the year, twice as many books were checked out of the library as the year before. Because you're going to fill that time doing something, and if it's reading a book or actually talking to your friend in the cafeteria as opposed to, because for a while some of the schools were also they would take the phones away during class and then give them back during lunch and free periods, which was almost completely backwards because then it's like the time you should be talking to your buddies is during lunch. So are you hearing anything in Vermont, or how do you feel about this whole move to get these phones out of school? Either of you?
Yeah, so my specialty now is now in education. So I've moved more into the ed tech sector with my work, and this is like a big conversation, right? Like it's difficult to be in ed tech, right, where we're using screens, but we know the data says that students learn better when they're not on screens. We know they learn better in community. We know they learn better in flipped classrooms. And so what I've really seen is when we use technology, like when we remove the phones, let's take the phones out, right? And we make technology a tool that is for connection, or a tool, we use it instead of it being the digital textbook, instead it's maybe, the porthole to the world, right? Exactly, in some ways, or a porthole to connection. That's when it's used right. Like I think with any of this, it's a tool, and we sort of flatline gave everybody the tool, but not necessarily the skill set to to teach with it or to learn with it. And so I think what we're finding is this new balance between technology in the classroom, whether that's removing phones or removing, the laptop in front of every student. I think there really is something to be said for these disconnected classrooms sort of recentering the small community, because I think that's what it's really doing, right? I think there's so much power in small community, and a small community can be the table that you sit around at lunch, right? The small community can be the connection between you and your classmates and the teacher. And that's really the antidote to loneliness. And so for me, I think the more that we can remove people from the technology and recenter the small community in the classroom, the more that we are sort of also solving this broader problem that everyone's talking about, right? Oh, kids are so lonely and all that. And I think reteaching these soft skills of like, let's have a conversation over lunch, or over the, group table.
Can I tell a story that's related to this? I can't stand not to
Please.
mention it. Liesl can back me up on this. We took the kids to study Buddhist art and architecture in Tibet years ago. I know we're not Buddhist.
As one does.
As one does.
As one does. So we were going to the most remote parts of Tibet with a fella who'd been there 19 years, a couple times a year. So he was very well versed in it. And it was a magical opportunity to see. I can't even imagine a universe more different than what my kids saw. Okay, so we go there. We get to Chengdu, which is the stepping off point to go to Tibet. And the Dalai Lama says something about China and how they're responsible for pollution. So China went boop, and they pressed a button, and there was no cell service in Tibet for 17 days, the exact 17 days that we were on this trip with the kids. And we'd gone with this guy, takes university kids. So we'd gone on this trip with about 20 university students. I think there was a Supreme Court justice from Australia. There were some adults. The director of innovation from Lego was on it. And then Chuck and I, like a smattering, a handful of adults, and then all these young people. Bill, it was the most extraordinary trip we ever took. All those curious minds. Remember, these were the kids that chose to go to Tibet instead of Rome for the summer, right?
Right.
And they were all funny in the stories, and we were on these buses where we were singing songs and swapping. Liesl, can you imagine how that? Because the day the internet got turned back on just happened to be the last day. Boom. Everybody was like this in their phones. Nobody cared about each other anymore.
And this was 10 years. This is 10, 15 years.
10 years ago.
12 years ago.
It'll only be more extreme now.
So
yeah. And I think
that's a great story.
So I just, it for us was a pie in the face. It was just the beginning of this. Everybody looking at their phones when they're out to dinner with their kids. What?
Yeah, that's a great story because, I started by asking in this part of the conversation about phones in schools. So we, as adults, we often look at these kids these days, and we are the worst role models. There was a great article somewhere just the other day that talked about if you want your kids to use your phone less, use your phone less. And there used to be this, Liesl, you'd probably be too young, and Lynda, you might have seen it years ago. There was this ad where this dad, it was a PSA, and the dad comes in and they found a box with drugs in it. And this kid, like, where'd you get this? Where'd you learn how to do this? He keeps pressing me. He finally says, I saw you do it, Dad. Right. And it's just very powerful. But that's what it's like with cell phones. It's like, and I'm with you. I see these families out to dinner, or I live in New York City now. So you get to see more people sort of outside of their cars, and you're sitting on the subway and everyone's on their phone. And walking down the street, every once in a while I'll just stand still and people kind of walk right into me on their phones. It's a real issue, and I think we need to be better role models. And that's a fantastic story because we take phones out of schools. Well, how about, when you get to your workplace, or how about when you get home from work? Put them in the charger and put them away.
I never appreciated 20-year-olds, 20-somethings more than that 17 days. It was such a delight. And we only got the privilege of these windows into their lives and their perspectives, and because they couldn't get on their phones.
Amazing. I love Lynda's story about losing cell coverage during a trip to Tibet. It's funny to remember that it wasn't very long ago where the phrase cell coverage in Tibet wouldn't even have meaning to us. Of course, you'd be out of reach while on an exotic international vacation, but today this concept seems unthinkable. And yet, losing the ability to be on their devices allowed Lynda, Liesl, and their fellow travelers to have an unusually good time getting to know each other. So let's talk more about the Goodness Exchange. And we talked a little bit about the origin. Walk us through sort of how it's developed, what it's become, and why you're still both so engaged in it as you are.
So I'll just pick up where Liesl began. So that where my story was, that's it. I'm going to write one article every day to prove that that there's, it's still an amazing world, because I was well-traveled and well-read. So I knew my patients that were suffering were never going to see this world of kindness and ingenuity that I'd seen, and happiness in some places that were rough, but people find a way. So I go ahead and do the best I can, writing something every day about something I had discovered or knew about, and sending people cool places. And then when Liesl graduated from Harvard, we're Irish citizens, so she had an EU passport and she could work anywhere in the world she wanted. And she sat me down one day on the front porch, and she just said, "Mom, I've looked at all my choices, and if you'll build a real website," I think she meant the $20,000 website. "If you build a real website, I'll join you, and you can pick it up from there, Liesl."
Yeah.
Liesl, what led you to say that?
Well, okay. So it's not like Lynda and I were best of friends forever, right? I think let's be very clear about this. We had a very typical mother-daughter relationship. I called twice in all of college, right? And I think to some extent, if I'm sitting on that porch and really thinking about who I was as a 22-year-old, I saw it as like a way of self-preservation. Let's move this from a blog into something. I know that my mom is never going to retire like a real person and like be happy with bird watching, although she does love it, but right. So I was like, let's work on something. This brings her a lot of joy that like she can do the rest of her life. And I think that was the conversation that we really had. And I was sort of half on board then, but for me, it was really when we started talking to teachers about bringing our positive content into the classroom that I was like fully hooked in. And then we started creating sort of this, we moved really from that blog into more of like an established publishing and media company. And I brought in my chops for, making sure our sourcing was really good and making sure that we were providing credit where, and where credit was due. And not that we weren't doing that before, but just like adding that extra element of rigor to it that I felt was really important in a world where we just add hyperlinks to everything. Instead, I wanted to put that full MLA sourcing in, or, a bibliography.
Yeah, we never did the hyperlink thing. I don't even think there were 10 on the whole website.
So tell us the range of offerings, because we've yet to get to Conspiracy of Goodness podcast, on which I was a guest, honored to be so. So what are the range of offerings from the Goodness Exchange?
Yeah, so we publish articles about people that are doing incredible things around the world. We say it's positive news for curious people. And then now we've really leaned, and then we have our, every other week, we have our Friday newsletter come out, which I'll let my mom talk about a little bit more. And then we have our podcast, as a Conspiracy of Goodness podcast. And we've really leaned into the podcast and the newsletter, as we're finding those are ways that people are really engaging with content. And yeah, Mom, you can go ahead and talk on both of those, because those are huge, huge projects for you.
Well, Bill, I don't know if you agree with me or not, but I don't think people are reading anymore. I think they're skimming.
I agree. I agree.
Okay.
Yeah.
They're skimming. They're skimming. And we were putting all this effort into these beautiful articles, as Liesl said, with Harvard standard citations and rigorous fact checking and all that stuff. And I just didn't see the kind of numbers that we could find in how much people were enjoying these articles. And I knew it wasn't a quality problem. I think it's just that people aren't reading. And then, of course, during the pandemic, I published a book called Happiness is an Option, with a capital is, because at that stage, boy, when the pandemic hit, we were not only in a low part as far as negative news, but then we had the pandemic. So I published that book. And during the pandemic, right there in the beginning, when the book came out, people kept saying, Dr. Lynda, what are you going to do about this? Can't you get us off the ground? I mean, and I thought of all the, Liesl said, we carefully wrote these articles. We would talk to all these people anyway and write about them. So someone finally said, why don't you just press the record button and start keeping track of these conversations you're having with all these people you're writing about? And so that's how the Conspiracy of Goodness podcast was born. And that was in September of the first fall of the pandemic, 2020.
How many episodes have you done now?
Well, I have to say, and I'll run that by you too, but I think we're all inundated with too much stuff. And when we were publishing a podcast episode and a newsletter once a week, there was no way anybody who cared could keep up with that. I love Seth Godin, but every single day on for his blog, I feel like it makes me feel bad that I can't keep up.
Right. I can't read it, so I wonder how he writes it. Right. I mean,
yes. So I said, so we decided about a year ago that we were going to go every other week on the podcast and every other week on the newsletter. And I'm just over the moon with these beautiful people. Now, most of my guests come from referrals of other guests. And so I'm just over the moon with the people that I get introduced to by others, or folks that just write me out of the blue and say, you've got to check out this. I should say we have never had advertisement, never ads. We're very proud of that. I've privately funded this whole thing for the world. And that's back to my mom and dad. They taught me that you need to decide how much is enough and then do what you can with what the universe provided you with the rest. And so I've always done that. We have no ads and we have no politics.
Yes. we share the politics free lane. I figure that's an area that's very well served. It doesn't need another clamoring voice.
Right. So, I'm just chatting with, I want to introduce you to this guest, Dr. Cindy Fast. She is the innovation director for a group in Africa that has taught giant pouched rats how to remove the landmines in 4 countries.
Stop.
Wait. They also are training rats to recognize tuberculosis in 15 seconds, where usually it takes 2 weeks to culture tuberculosis and figure out if somebody has it. They're training these rats to run down this tube with samples, this little sniff. They take one sniff, move on, one sniff, move on. And if they come upon one that has TB, they'll do a little dance. And so if public health officials get one person in a little village in remote Africa who may have TB, they can find it out almost instantly, and the person hasn't spread it to 50 other people. But if you do it the old-fashioned way, it's 2 weeks them walking around.
That reminds me, they trained dogs to smell COVID back when, and apparently, if you'd had enough dogs, you would have used dogs instead of swabbed. But you couldn't; it wasn't practical. But they were more accurate. But wait, you had a punchline on the rats. Keep going.
Oh wait.
There's more.
So I've interviewed her twice. So the first interview was just out over the moon with those 2 topics. She goes into it. But this last one, I called her up recently and said, hey, it's been 2.5 years. What's going on with the popo? And she goes, wait for it. We've trained the rats to wear little backpacks, little tiny backpacks.
Oh, stop.
And now, they're near Turkey. So when in Turkey, where it's very seismically active and a whole building goes down, you can't even begin to clean up the rubble of that building because there might be somebody alive in there. So they've trained the rats to wear these little backpacks and go into the rubble and find people that are still alive. And once they find someone, they can talk to them.
What?
Through the backpacks and a camera.
Oh! I thought you meant the rats could talk to them. Like, now you've gone too far.
No, the
backpack. Amazing. It's like a little lipstick camera or something. Or wow.
Yeah. And so, okay, let's say there's 40 feet of rubble by 70. You can't even take a backhoe to that, because if you shift a little bit of it and there was somebody alive there, you could kill them. But the rats can clear whole areas and say, there's nobody here. There's nobody here. So they can get to people. So, and I could go on for hours and hours about people like that who are doing good things that we're just not hearing about in the news. Like, look at you, Bill. You of all people, I'm sure you are looking for these kind of stories, and it's the first you've heard of a popo?
Well, that's the thing. When people say to me, "How do you find all these guests?" I'm like, "That's the easy part." There are so many people. It just, if you're looking for it. The problem is a lot of us aren't, like someone said, we used to find the news, now the news finds us. And the news that finds us is not the news you should probably be consuming. But if you actively are looking out for people like this, it's crazy. It's everywhere. If there are any parents listening to this who are currently having a rough time with one or more of their kids, perhaps you can take some comfort in hearing how far these two have come along in their relationship. And I do believe that keeping an eye peeled for the goodness in the world does create a virtuous cycle that allows us to continue to feel better ourselves as we discover all the great and inventive work being done all around us. Speaking of which, how about that rat story? I was glad I asked the clarifying question about whether the backpack rats were talking to the people who were trapped. I was starting to question the entire story until Lynda set me straight. Now let's get back to the final segment of this blue sky conversation. Liesl, I'd be curious, you've mentioned EdTech a few times, sort of what you're seeing. I had Sal Khan on my show, who's developed Conmigo, and he's talking about the potential of AI in education. It was like, that was the most uplifting conversation. And I've read his book too about AI that I've heard on any subject. What kind of things are you seeing around education and young people? Or tell us more what you're doing and what you're excited about there.
Yeah. So, I mean, Conmigo, huge one. And then another big one is Magic School AI. And what I'm really excited about when it comes to AI in education is the ways in which we've moved away from just being afraid that the students are going to cheat, right? So that was like the first wave, right? The first wave of it was like, oh my God, the students are cheating. They're not learning anything. They're going to be so stupid, blah, blah, blah. And now I think we're getting to a point where now teachers are utilizing these tools the way they're meant to be used, right? They're able to move through mundanity. We're able to ID students earlier and intervene better, right? We are able to now better assist students and give them feedback in real time. Like, I remember writing the essay, having to go into my teacher, say, what do you think about this? Then go back, rewrite it, right? Now there's tools that like a student can input their essay with the rubric that they're being graded against and get immediate feedback and do the quick iteration. And huge to that is like, when I talk to teachers and when I've heard from, I went to EdTech Week, I guess it was 2 years ago now, and they were talking about, teachers were actually talking about how like traditionally, right, the kids wrote the essay and then it would take the teacher 2 weeks to turn around 150 essays, right?
Right.
Now, while the students still have like the thing that they're learning in mind, they can turn those essays around a lot faster. And other teachers are telling their students, are saying, hey, I'm using AI to grade your paper. I'm going through and reviewing to make sure they got it right. But if you feel that the AI and I got something wrong, come and talk to me, because AI is not always right. So it's this amazing opportunity to teach students about AI, about the fact that it's not always right, that you should question what the technology is putting out. And they're doing it in real time and in practice, which I think is brilliant, right? So I think that there is this way in which, I think back to this story of when the printing press was invented. And everybody said, oh my God, the world is going to get so much more stupider. Well, there you go. I just proved my own point. The world is going to get so much dumber because anybody can write now and anybody can be an author. And instead of saying, wow, everybody's going to have the opportunity of literacy, instead it was, oh no, there's going to be too much crap out there, right? But now I think with AI, we're also finding ways to make it better. I think another great thing that's out there is this problem of students being afraid to ask questions, right? So the idea of, if you have to ask a question in class, that means you're dumb, right? So students are not raising their hand. But to do a really good AI prompt, to do proper prompt generation, you have to ask the right questions to ChatGPT, to Gemini, whatever you're using. So if we are using this as a tool to help students become more curious, right, to teach them prompt generation, because let's face it, AI is not going away. They're going to need great prompt generation to be great employees in the future, if that's what we really care about, right? They're getting this opportunity to practice their questioning muscles. And even I see it in my own world where I'm using a lot of ChatGPT. It's like, I'm becoming better at asking questions because that's a muscle that I'm now having to flex. And so I actually think there's opportunities to make students a lot better from the way that we use AI.
Yeah, all of those things are music to my ears. And another thing Sal pointed out is the ability for these to essentially become tutors, these tools. So for years now, and it's only gotten worse, frankly, from what I've seen, the wealthy kids who can afford the SAT prep and the person to read their college essay. And by the way, back to AI is going to help kids cheat. It's a very fine line between plagiarism and having somebody edit your essay for college, right? These are slippery slopes. And his point is that this could be a great leveler where everybody could have a tutor. They even have it built into Conmigo, as I understand it. You have a tutor for your child, and if said child misses, 2 sessions in a row, the parents get a notification. The little things that they build in that just make it a little bit more human, a little bit more monitorable, if that's a word, that I think is amazing. And back to asking questions, the other thing he told me that just blew me away, first of all, back to plagiarism, he said, who said that writing a term paper is the be all and end all of demonstrating knowledge, first of all. And second of all, if you think it is, then do it in class with a blue book. Our daughter's in a graduate program now. They're doing their exams in blue books because it just eliminates all that. But he was talking about with Conmigo, they're designing ways that you can read The Great Gatsby, and instead of writing a paper on why does Jay Gatsby look at the green light, you can ask Jay Gatsby why he looks at the green light. And he can say, well, old sport, I look at the green light. Or in history, you can ask Thomas Jefferson why he wrote all men are created equal when he owned slaves, and have a back and forth. Now, he said, we've got to put guardrails on this. We've got to be really careful, because he said every kid says, should we vote for Trump or Harris? And Thomas Jefferson says, I don't have historical context to answer that. But it's this back and forth, this inquiry. And he used the phrase I loved about AI. He said, we should approach it with educated bravery. We should be smart about it, but we shouldn't be timid. And I think that's a really good line.
Yeah, I would agree wholeheartedly with that. And actually, I was at a big conference for English teachers last year, and there was a tool that we were using where we were making a bot that sounded, she was like, I don't get how I can use this in my classroom. I'm an English teacher. And I said, well, why don't you make a bot? What are your students, what are they reading right now? What is your substitute teaching? She goes, well, they're reading act 1 of Hamlet. And I was like, well, why don't you make this bot so that it talks to them like Hamlet's, ghost father? And so she and I went back and forth, and we created this bot together. And it was so funny because she was asking it questions like her students were going to ask. It was like, bro, like, what do you think of your brother gutting with your wife or whatever? And, then it would reply, oh, I am heartbroken, but in this very Shakespearean way. And she said the students thought it was hilarious. I followed up with her, and she thought that it was like the most engaged they'd been, because they could add the juxtaposition of their language with that language made it feel more real. And so I think there's so much creativity to be had if you, like we said, like approach it with sort of this courageous, but we got to put guardrails on things, but understand that we're learning and that we're growing with it, and that it can be positive instead of just being fearful of it. I think, like we did with many kids in the internet, we never taught the guide rules there. Instead, we can do that fearlessly, or rather with caution, with AI.
And back to what we were saying before about kids and screens, teachers are in competition with that, right? So if you can't make the classroom interesting and stimulating, it's harder and harder to do. These kind of tools are amazing. So with the time we have left, I have a question for you, Lynda. I find, and I tell people of my advancing age, that one of the things that makes me optimistic is spending time with younger people. And you have the honor and privilege to be Liesl's mom, and to work with her, and to listen to things I just listened to from her about the future with this sense of promise and hope and optimism. How does that fuel your view of the future when you have a young person in your family and in your work that brings this to the table?
So I have this great analogy I want to share with you to that point. Like, there's this whole generational disconnect between Liesl's generation and mine. And I'm on a lot of boards right now. I'm at that stage of life. My husband and I retired from dentistry, so I'm on all these boards. And I was just at a meeting last night where every single person around this 20-person table was over 55. And we were talking about it's a transportation. I'm kind of like the road commissioner of our little Vermont town. Not officially, but that's my role, is to go to the transportation board. And they were all going on and on like 55-year-old people and older would. And then I had to bring in the fact that, where is the future here? Where is the future thinking? We can't just keep our head down and look at every pothole and bridge that doesn't look right. What about her generation that cares about quality of life and wants roads to be wider so they can ride a bike safely down it or take a walk? Or, her generation is so wonderful about finding a better work-life balance, I think, than mine. And they're going to create it. So it's just a matter. So here's how I tell people the intergenerational workplace works. I got over this I have to be right thing, or I know more than she does because I've been on the planet longer. Here's the way I divided it out. I think of the Earth out in space in front of me, and I can see the whole thing from the back because I've been around the planet for 60 years. Now, Liesl, she's standing on the edge, and the Earth is turning this way towards us. She's standing on the very edge up there, and she can see over to what's coming. She's right on that edge, and I can say, I think we ought to do this. And she'll go, no, that's not what comes. That won't fit what's coming. And so we've learned to trust each other, what she sees, because she's closer to the future than I am. But she respects that I'm back in space and I can see the big picture between her and my lived experience. And I can say, when she shouts back and says, I think we ought to do this, I can reflect what I've experienced or what I've learned in my long life and fill that gap between us. And if we both trust what each other has, can see and know that we can't see the same things, we can go forward in like this weirdly magical way, which is what she and I have managed to do over 11 years.
And if we could do that more broadly in society with generations and workplaces. And well, that is a beautiful way to wrap up our conversation, Liesl and Lynda, my first ever parent-child podcast interview. I wish you continued success. The work you do is very inspiring to me as I got into this, and seeing people like you working so hard at this and being so like-minded and positive about the possibilities of this work. You've really inspired me. And it was a pleasure, Lynda, to be on your show. And I'm so glad you were both able to join me. Thank you so much for what you do and for your time today.
All right. Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much, Bill.
Pleasure. I enjoyed hearing Liesl speak with such enthusiasm about AI in education and celebrating that we've gotten past the initial they're all going to cheat phase and are now taking Sal Khan's approach of educated bravery in coming up with new classroom tools. As usual, speaking with a much younger person like Liesl leaves me even more optimistic about our future. And if you're still wondering, as I was, I looked it up, and yes, monitorable is a word. Lucked out on that one. I hope you enjoyed this Blue Sky conversation with Lynda Ulrich and Liesl Ulrich-Verderber. Before you go, please leave us a rating or review. These help us make a better show and have an impact on influencing new listeners to check us out. And follow the Optimism Institute on social media to learn more about the work we're doing, as well as information about upcoming episodes. This episode of Blue Sky was edited and mixed by the amazing team at Sound On, Sound Off. To learn more about their work, visit soundonsoundoff.com. And all graphics and cover art for Blue Sky and the Optimism Institute are produced by Crush Graphics. That's Crush with a K, and you can find them at crushgraphics.com. Until next time, I'm the founder of the Optimism Institute and host of Blue Sky, Bill Burke, and I thank you for listening.